Hey everyone, this is going to be the second of two videos that talks about our primary competitors in an effort to give our instructors some supplemental information with examples to more effectively teach lessons related to the Great Power Competition, or strategic competition. In this video, I will summarize key points a sister service had at their roundtable in April of 2021 to discuss China's military and the Chinese Communist Party and how the U.S. can present a more formidable challenge to the People's Liberation Army. In part of this video, I will show you a recent Chinese recruitment video for their military, which highlights much of what the speakers at the event discussed. One of the primary points of discussion in this roundtable was the military reforms that the Chinese Communist Party is currently engaged in. In very broad terms, it appears that the People's Liberation Army has similar aspirations to our own military, with goals to more effectively operate jointly in all domains. First, when you talk about the Chinese military or the People's Liberation Army, it is important to understand a few foundational elements. 1. The term PLA, or People's Liberation Army, refers to all of China's military, not just their ground forces. 2. All soldiers swear loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. And 3. The People's Liberation Army has not seen a full mobilization in a military engagement since the 1979 Sino-Vietnamese War, meaning both the Chinese Communist Party and the West have very little idea how effective they would perform in a modern conflict. Given these key understandings, the Chinese Communist Party has embarked on a modernization effort based on 5 principles: total Chinese Communist Party control, prioritizing national economic development, threat perception and long-term modernizations, changes to conscription rules, and fixing the professional officer NCO Corps. In short, most changes to date have been about organizations, people, processes, and mindsets rather than about material, technology, and weapons systems. Most of these changes are considered generational initiatives rather than quick fixes. I'll touch on each of these in a little more detail now. Party control. All soldiers swear loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party, and the People's Liberation Army has a strict system of dual military political leadership in the military. This means that each unit has political commissars who have just as much responsibility for the forces in that unit and just as much legal authority as commanders of those units. Prioritizing national economic development. Modernization efforts will only go as far and as long as national economic development will allow. While their official defense budget is about a third of the size as the U.S. defense budget, their private industry is so intertwined with the defense industry that much of their technology and modernization comes directly from state industry. All businesses operating in China are required to include a sort of political commissar to ensure loyalty to Chinese Communist Party objectives. Threat perception and long-term modernization. China views the most likely threat as a local war, and they see defense modernization being a long-term, multi-generational effort. Their current goals are to modernize doctrine, force structure, personnel, and equipment by 2035, with hopes to have a world-class military by 2049, the 100-year anniversary of the People's Republic of China. Changing conscription rules. The Chinese Communist Party is changing the conscription term from 1 year to 2 years and extending the maximum voluntary service length to 30 years or until the age of 35. They are also changing some of the formerly conscripted billets to professional NCO Corps billets. Fixing professional officer and NCO corps. The current professionalized corps of their military is not combat tested, and until the early 1980s, their military academies provided only the equivalent of a trade or technical degree rather than an undergraduate or graduate level degree. Modern efforts are centered on joint training, which is currently only taught at their National Defense University, and further professionalization of their officer and NCO corps. Again, these are viewed as problems that will take decades or multiple generations to correct. In light of these challenges that the People's Liberation Army have identified for correction, the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army are very cautious in their attitudes towards war. They plan to gradually increase their combat readiness and warfighting abilities through realistic training and eventually expand their capabilities globally. In the time being, they would prefer to achieve their national objectives through measures short of war, but they will fight if forced. If they perceive a threat locally, they have the capabilities and the willpower to engage in homeland defense or a conflict just beyond their borders. On top of these military reforms, China is also making great progress in bioscience and biotechnology research, test, and evaluation, including applications to enhance or optimize the performance of their own soldiers, and the use of biomedicines and technologies to disrupt threats. And just like their defense industry, the commercial sector is crucial in supporting these efforts by reducing the monetary resources that the state needs to expend on research and development. Part of the reason this bioscience research and development is possible and happening within the People's Republic of China is because of China's intellectual property laws and the government philosophy which spurns Western ethics. They are able to draw in researchers to work on projects that their own nations will not conduct because of ethical considerations, and then all of the resulting intellectual property belongs to the People's Republic of China and can be used for any application the People's Republic of China wants. None of this requires informing or even obtaining permission from the researchers who created the data or research. And oftentimes, these researchers and scientists have little or no idea about how China's intellectual property laws will strip them of their rights to the intellectual property generated by their research. The most important thing that we can do as military leaders is to study and disseminate information about the People's Liberation Army to our airmen and guardians, and use all joint assets available within the DoD for education and training to capitalize on the existing expertise and resources. What does that mean for us specifically? We have resources like the Chinese Aerospace Studies Institute, experts in the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies that sit in our same building, and experts around the academic circle in schools like the Air Command and Staff College and the Air War College that we can lean on to help improve our own knowledge and understanding of the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army. All of the speakers at the discussion reiterated that our people provide the United States Armed Forces our asymmetric advantage. I would like to close by asking you to reflect on a few questions. Since China's intellectual property laws and research ethics put the United States at a disadvantage in certain aspects, what can we do to keep pace without compromising our values? What is the most likely scenario that could bring the United States and China into kinetic conflict? Are we prepared for this scenario? With China's military identified as the pacing threat, what education and training would best prepare the United States Armed Forces, or the Air Force specifically, to better understand competition along the competition continuum with China and the People's Liberation Army? China and Russia, while seemingly allies of convenience, have had many historical grievances and sources of tension. What are some ways we can leverage these, and to what ends?